let's start by setting our motivation. So we generate these minds as we do of refuge and confidence and bodhicitta, turning toward the Buddha and his teachings and the community of practitioners who have understood his teachings deeply as the ultimate sources of refuge, based on an understanding of the power and the validity of the Buddha's teachings, the wisdom contained in the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment. And thinking that the purpose of practicing that wisdom, achieving the same result as the Buddha, is to unlock one's own potential to be of perfect benefit to sentient beings. To become capable of truly guiding sentient beings out of suffering. We establish those minds of refuge and faith and bodhicitta. All right. So, are there any questions from prior material before moving on? Let's see. So then we're in, I believe, day 230, 231 in that section. And we had just talked about generating renunciation even to what seems like comparatively something beneficial, something that we ought to normally, that we might be interested in or attracted to, the kind of sense pleasure that is enjoyed in the upper realm. But even seeing that that is still also part of cyclic existence and is therefore also still ultimately suffering compared to full enlightenment. So then, yeah, so day 230, even the form realm gods, he talks about, Lama Zopa talks about, the kind of absorption, the kind of meditative absorption necessary to create the karma to be born as a form realm God. But he says this is a worldly path and not the path to enlightenment, although the attainment of calm abiding is the same for both paths. A form realm God has aversion to samsaric sense pleasures, but unfortunately not the whole of samsara, and sees the peace of meditative absorption as the true peace and happiness. So we said, that there are benefits. You do turn your back on the desire realm once you have achieved the form realm absorption, but you may well mistake the form realm absorption for, as he says, genuine, true peace and happiness. And so you kind of get stuck with that misunderstanding of the form realm. And so the experience in that realm is so subtle, sort of like nothingness, kind of what that being is sort of like what they're experiencing. But he says there's no way a being can develop bodhicitta and wisdom realizing emptiness while being absorbed in that kind of nothingness. Rather than cultivating wisdom, that just generates ignorance, which results in a grosser rebirth. And then, so of course, it's really the same as in the form and formless realms. We talked about both of those being beyond the desire realm and both being the result of meditative absorption. He says, when the formless realm gods are dying and realize they're about to be reborn in the lower realms, they can remember what led them to the pinnacle of samsara. They think that all their great effort has been to no avail and that there is no such thing as liberation, thus causing heresy to arise in their mind, which results, he says, in rebirth in the hell realm. So, they mistaken here talking about, even going beyond the form realm into the formless realm, the very top of what's possible within cyclic existence. And then they think, this is it. But then, of course, as they're experiencing death, they come to see that obviously the state that they've accomplished is not eternal. It's not genuine, lasting peace. It's just another temporary state. So then they're like, there must be nothing. It must not be true that there is such thing as genuine peace. And that's kind of, that turning away from any kind of spirituality, and that is a sort of a rejection of what's possible, and therefore, they give up searching, and then they take rebirth here, potentially in the lowest possible. So they go from the highest state all the way down to the lowest ordinary state. Okay. Any thoughts or questions about this or the material that we've been covering? So then I'm going to summarize in a way the next few contemplations, because the next few are all related to the three types of suffering. Day 231, day 232, day 233, day 234. So those ones, those are all just all talking about the three types of suffering. So we've looked at, as we've said, there are really these three lists: the list of 3, the list of 6, and the list of 8. And this is talking about the list of 3, the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and then all pervasive suffering being the list of 3. So, and we talk about this, and we've talked about this throughout other modules, and even it's discovering Buddhism in a nutshell. They go into the list of 3. So the suffering of suffering is any overt physical or mental distress, anything that a person would, or any other sentient being would experience, that they would just sort of plainly say is something that they wish to be separated from, that is causing them truly overt physical or mental distress. And then the suffering of change is much more subtle, much more difficult, because, as we've said, anything that falls under this category is what a person off the street, an ordinary person, would label as happiness. Eating good food, seeing, a play or a movie that they have been excited about, meeting up with a good friend for coffee, dinner, going to an amusement park or reading a good book, any of the sorts of things that we try to orient ourselves toward as being kind of enriching and beneficial and enjoyable. Those are all, from the Buddhist perspective, contained in the suffering of change. And as we've said, one, because in one way, none of those enjoyments are anything but fleeting. They only can produce a temporary, pleasant feeling in the body or mind. It's not stable, it's not lasting. And the deeper reason why that's true is because we mistake a reduction, a temporary reduction in an agitated state that was occurring in the body or mind as what is happiness. So when we're bored and then we engage in a new activity that we identified, as being of interest to us, initially there is a sense of relief that the boredom that we've done something about the boredom. We were experiencing something unpleasant, something that agitated the mind, and we engaged in some novel stimulus. And so at that first moment, the joining with that novel stimulus is kind of like scratching the itch of the mosquito bite, where you were distressed, you were agitated, and now something has been done to kind of distract from that experience. But then as that new experience wears on, it comes with its own new suffering. And over time, that sense of relief will wear off, and the suffering that is part of the new object will become more and more manifest. And at some point, regardless of what it is, at some point, it will become agitating by itself, simply by continuing to be in relation to that object. By having it be part of our experience, we will experience a new agitation, a new disturbing state of body or mind. And so the object itself, contact with the object itself that we chose freely, will become painful. So that's the suffering, the deeper level of the suffering of change, is that the object literally changes into suffering through no mechanism other than just continuing to be in contact with it. And then the third category of suffering is all pervasive suffering. And then that again just means that, that there's nowhere that we can take rebirth with ordinary aggregates with a body and mind that exists due to past karma and delusion that won't be subject to the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change. That they're, if you look at humans or animals or upper realm beings or other lower, that they are all characterized by the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change simply because they have a body and mind that exists due to past karma and delusion. He says, just this impure body and this deluded mind means that we experience pervasive compounding suffering. There is no greater problem than this. Because of the mistake of having taken a samsaric body, our life is constantly busy serving our body's needs like a slave. Having this contaminated body is like living in a garbage can or a septic tank. So kind of being very obtuse about it there, I guess. Not getting to the point. I don't know why, but so and those are all things that we've covered, before, the three types of suffering. Any thoughts or questions so far? And then in day 235, Lama Zopa, talks about how, as ordinary beings, we kind of, in a way, similar to Shantideva, saying that ordinary beings, they wish for happiness, but they run toward suffering. Um, you know, he says that we think that we're working toward happiness by trying to kind of make samsara work, by trying to fix samsara by getting more money, more status, more reputation, but that in reality we're just creating the cause of suffering. He says, because our motivation is not even attachment to future lives, but just attachment to this life, every action of our body, speech, and mind becomes negative karma. So, here it's kind of talking about the small scope, in a way, how the entryway into spiritual practice, at least, is to care more about future lives than just the content of this life. And we've talked when we covered the small scope, we talked about how that really is a profound, as he's saying, really a profound reorientation from what is typical in the world. How if a person, how generally people are only interested in tomorrow, in the next 5 years, and in whatever happens between now and the moment of death, and how the entryway for being a spiritual practitioner from the Buddhist perspective is to care more about future lives than to care about between now and then. So if we're not yet that, then it's all negative. And then, he points out here and in many other writings of his that that sort of pre-spiritual perspective, which is the default, is shared, by all other ordinary sentient beings, even animals, that a cow and a spider, and the purpose of their life is just to eat the best kind of food that they can, to you know be warm but not hot, to avoid cold, to find sources of water, um, to run away from danger, um, and that most people, their motivation is the same. um, they just want to be more comfortable, to avoid anything that is difficult, um, and to work only for this life, in a way, to only be concerned about maximizing sensory pleasure between now and the day that we die. And he says that the real purpose, the ultimate purpose, is to only to achieve enlightenment. That if we seek anything other than that, any kind of lesser purpose, that we're not really fulfilling our potential, and really we're not taking advantage of this perfect human rebirth, because only with a perfect human rebirth do we have any chance of achieving enlightenment. And to use that kind of extraordinarily rare opportunity, um, in the same way that any other normal, ordinary sentient being is using it, um, is kind of a disservice to that opportunity. Still know any questions or anything that's helpful for people? And then day 236, um, he says that what we should come to terms with is that this is just the nature of samsara. He says the nature of fire is burning, the nature of samsara is suffering. So here he's getting at sort of the heart of the idea of renunciation, which is to give up the idea that we can make samsara work, that that it can be perfected, that we can get some sort of non-suffering result out of it. It was kind of funny at the center. Just recently, they put in a water feature outside in the courtyard with the Zombala um, statue, and then some running water. But everybody had like a different opinion about how much water pressure there was supposed to be. Like, oh, this is splashing, and then, oh, this is trickling, and then they took it apart, and then the water was just running everywhere on the ground. So I was like, oh, yeah. And then so David walks in, and I was like, oh yeah, they're trying to make samsara work, out there. And because they weren't just like, okay, this is what it is, but it's like, well, no, it can't be this, it can't be that. We have to try to figure out exactly, and it's like, you're never going to, because you get it to do something, but then at some point, there's going to be dirt, and, there's something's going to get blocked, and you have to go in, and then you're going to lose that setting, and, you're going to start all over again at some point. And so, it isn't to say that you don't, you know, ever, that like that you're like, okay, well, we don't have to design this building to the right kind of fire codes, or, of course, you do reasonable things. And so I was making a joke. I wasn't like saying we shouldn't just, that we should just abandon, we should think, oh, well, this water feature isn't going to be perfect, so let's not, so it's a question, though. It's a question of like, how much time and energy and effort are you putting into something to, you know, before you say that this is good enough, that this is, this is fine, versus like, no, it's not fine. Or, because if you keep getting 10 or 15 different points of view about, or in the gompa, like there's a fan, in the gompa. So this person wants the fan on, this person wants the fan off, and then they're like, oh, but it shouldn't be, the thermostat shouldn't be this, it should be that. And nobody's like practicing contentment about, well, whether, I might get comfortable, and this might be, but then there's other people who are going to be uncomfortable. They're going to be, they're not dressed the way I'm dressed. So they're going to be too hot. They're going to be too cold. For whatever, whether the fan's on, whether it's off, whether it's 71, whether it's 74, you're only going to make a certain number of people, happy, and you're going to always be making a certain number of other people, uncomfortable, irrespective of, because samsara can't be fixed. You can't come up with some solution that everyone's going to be satisfied with. That's not in the nature of samsara. So we should just be like, like as he says, we should just think, of course, when something disappointing or difficult, we should just think, well, of course, I have a body and mind that exists due to past karma and delusion, and therefore I'm going to meet with these difficult circumstances again and again. That's the nature of this body and mind. My body, I will suffer if I don't have the right kind of temperature, or, if people don't agree with the way that I think this should be done or that should be done. And, because that's the nature of the body and mind that I've appropriated as an ordinary sentient being. And so, he says, if we can accept this, then, it's not a shock when we do meet with, it's sort of a mind training that, well, that's the nature of cyclic existence, is to be broken, to be presenting me with difficult circumstances. And then, of course, he points out that, as we've said, samsara is personal. It's, it's our samsara. No one but, quote unquote, us, over previous lives, of course, have created the karmic causes to experience this continued samsara. So the fact that, we haven't yet put an end to our own samsara is the result of ourselves not having put an end to our own samsara. Not that someone did it to us, or that it's unfair, or that we're just thrown into it causelessly, but that, it's like, if you don't know, if you find yourself, needing to swim, because there's a flood or something, and you've never learned how to swim, you can't be like, well, that's not my fault. You had your whole life, you could have learned how to swim, and now you're realizing that that would have been a good idea, and you didn't do it. And so now you're presented. And so that's kind of, we're presented with this life because over previous lives, we never created the causes and the conditions for enlightenment. And so no one did that to us. We just didn't create those fully in previous lives. And so it's our responsibility then to do something that now, to actively continue to work. And, certainly we did work over previous lives, but that work just wasn't fully completed. It didn't go all the way to enlightenment. And so now, we have the opportunity to take it, fully all the way to enlightenment. Or we'll get more of this. We'll get yet another ordinary life. Any thoughts or questions?
This may be a very beginner question, Venerable, but how does one study and practice without becoming overwhelmed?
I mean, I think that we're meant to be affected, not, I think that's the point in a way, is to open to the existential condition of ourselves and all other sentient beings, but also recognize that, which is in a way kind of overwhelming. I mean, the sheer amount of suffering that exists in, you could say, all of reality, is overwhelming. But also, we know that there is a method that we can follow. So, in that way, it doesn't do any good if we fall apart in response to that. If that understanding spurs us into following that path and that method, then that's, I think, ideal. But we do need to have kind of a measured, longer term perspective, understanding that all we can do is take each day as it comes and try to make incremental progress that day, and then do the same thing the next day. Understanding that it is possible to completely put an end to all of this suffering by following that method. And so it isn't hopeless. So it might be, in a way, certainly daunting, certainly, but because all of that suffering has a cause, and there's a way out of all of that suffering, then we really, in a way, we should just feel joyful that that is true, and kind of just be absorbed, because that is all that we can do. There isn't something else other than following that method leading to that result. That is the solution. And so in order to follow it, we have to stay functional and not let it overwhelm us. It can be overwhelming, but it shouldn't overwhelm. It can be like I mean, the always crying bodhisattva, that person certainly um, wasn't happy about all of this. I mean, it deeply affected, that person's mind, and and so having your heart open in that way is important. But um, if it becomes, but we should meet that challenge with understanding that there are very clear methods, and there's a very precise solution and path. Um, and so we should just be motivated by that to apply ourselves to achieving that result, um, because that is effective and that will bring about that suffering, that the elimination of that suffering. Um, so it's just important to not, because it's not hopeless, because there are reliable, repeatable, powerful methods, then we just get to work, and we just use that to not get distracted, and then, but recognize that we have to take care of the body and mind. We have to do things in a balanced way that's not going too fast, beyond what we can handle at that time. Um, in the same way that people maybe are motivated, um, to adopt a particular career because they see, a need in the world. There are many people who, they want to do something about homelessness or about cancer, or, and those problems are also affecting millions or billions of people, worldwide. Um, and so, that can feel overwhelming too. But I would say that that's even, but the population that they're trying to help is also not served by that person feeling like that they should just give up, that it's beyond what they can do. Except, what I would say the difference is that, in that context, one person really can only make a pretty limited, an important difference for all of the people that they meet in their life, and a life, a worthy, life-changing difference for a lot of people. But still, homelessness and so on will exist, beyond, regardless. Uh, Whereas this is different. We literally are talking about an end of all suffering, and that's actually possible through this method. Um, so, um, so we can't, like I said, we can't allow it to derail us and kind of, just make it so that, it's so overwhelming that we just don't do anything. Um, we recognize that all of this is fixable, and the way that I fix it is just taking a holistic, realistic, long-term, understanding that it may take more than one lifetime. It probably will take more than one lifetime for most of us. Um, but still, all I can really do then is I have today, and what do I do with today? And then if I have tomorrow, what can I do with tomorrow? And still, of course, you can make plans. You can be like, well, there's this retreat in 6 months or in a year. So if I'm alive in 6 months or in a year, what are the causes and conditions that would allow me to be able to do that? And then you also work toward, so you can plan, of course, for longer term things, um, hoping that they also will happen. Um, but but yeah, I think that, we're meant to see the gravity of the situation, but just to have a really pragmatic view about it and just try to make incremental progress. Any other questions? In a way, in a way, and this happens a lot, but Lama Yeshe, in the next contemplation is kind of answering that question, uh, talking about in day 237, renunciation as not being something that demands some sort of wholesale radical change to the sort of fundamental structure of our lives. We don't have to, get divorced or move to the Himalayas or, only subsist on, rice and nettle soup for the, remainder of our lives. All we have to do is, in terms of this particular realization, the realization of renunciation, it isn't that any of those things are an obstacle. Being married, having children, having a career, being, having a place in society, none of those are themselves obstacles, as long as we maintain a balanced view, and we don't expect that um, that our status or our wealth or our reputation or our possessions have any power to truly benefit us in a deep, long-term, sustainable way. That we see it for what it is, and we see it as a tool. Certainly having a warm, safe home permits more practice, easy access to our practice, being able to eat every day and, sustain and nourish the body is better than going too far, punishing the body through starvation or just just not having the conditions to be able to provide food for oneself. But we recognize that, there is no kind of food or amount of food or type of house or type of car that will prevent us from suffering, that will be really, truly, um, that which holds back suffering. It's just they can be tools that aid us in having the time and the space to engage in our practice, and to some degree, of course, because we have this ordinary body and mind, and it gets tired, and it gets, there's aches and there's pains, resting and so on is also part of dealing skillfully with. So, we think, oh, I'm taking a break for the benefit of sentient beings. I'm resting my body, I'm resting my mind, I'm, going off and maybe, doing something more enjoyable, but it's to kind of recharge and to come back to my practice with a fresher, more renewed body and mind, not seeing it as a good in and of itself. So he says, we can experiment. Does dissatisfaction come from my own mind or not? He says that is enough. We don't need to make extreme changes or cut ourselves off from the world in order to learn that dissatisfaction comes from our own mind. We can continue to lead a normal life, but at the same time, observe the nature of the dissatisfied mind. This approach is so realistic and so practical, he says. In this way, we will definitely get all the answers we seek.
Venerable, at the beginning of the section, the last sentence in the first paragraph,
I think they froze.
that's experiencing and how the two relate. Is he frozen or are we frozen? Okay, he's frozen. We're frozen. Okay. Wait a minute.
Are you back?
Sorry, yeah, we're back.
Okay.
He says, the nature of both the object we're enjoying and the mind that's experienced that enjoyment and how the two relate. If we understand all this deeply, that is religion. Is he alluding to basically impermanence, emptiness, and I mean, is he talking about something beyond what I think he's talking about?
I think, in other places, he's, Lama Yeshe has said, things like, my robes are not spiritual, my rosary is not, my mala is not spiritual. Understanding the nature of, spirituality is understanding the nature of mind. So I think that's, what he's saying here, just in another way, is that spirituality, or religion or spiritual, whatever genuine, a genuine path of spirituality is understanding the nature of how the mind works. And that's what Buddhism is only trying to do. They're trying to understand the nature of phenomena, the nature of the mind. So, yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate, the way that manifests most directly toward enlightenment is understanding the emptiness of the mind and understanding the emptiness of the phenomena that are cognized by the mind. But also understanding the way that the afflictions, arise, the secondary and tertiary and so on afflictions, understanding how concentration, how the mind can give rise to single-pointed concentration. All of these insights, they're all related to the mind. So he's relating this, I think, specifically to not exaggerating, positive or negative experiences or objects, not having an unrealistic or deluded way of relating to objects. But that's really the whole, you could say that's the essence, because that exaggeration is based on misunderstanding the nature of both the object and the mind and body that are involved in cognizing the object. And then on the basis of that misunderstanding, attachment arises, aversion arises, and then all kinds of other afflictions arise, and we engage in karma, in service to whatever affliction is arising. And then that takes us toward or away from enlightenment based on kind of karma that's, arising. So really all of it is understanding how the mind works and how it cognizes.
Thank you.
We'll leave it on day. I think we might actually be done. Yeah, we're done with this section early. We kind of went through that quickly. So we will, we'll look at day 238 next week, or on Thursday, but then we'll mainly be starting with the evolution of samsara. And in this section, we're going to be doing a couple things, but kind of one of the major things is looking at a variety of afflicted states and the role that they play in creating our samsara, and then the antidotes that we can employ to put an end to that. That's one of the major themes in that section. Any final questions for today? All right, so we'll dedicate then. So we'll recollect our motivation and think that listening and contemplating, we've actualized that motivation, and that has created positive energy in the mind. And that positive energy will ripen in the future in beneficial ways. That we want it to particularly ripen in ways that support our spiritual growth and development. So think of, for you specifically, the ways in which you would like to dedicate your positive karma as causes and conditions to bring about the flourishing of your potential. Okay. So we will pick things up on Thursday.